Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I'm George Hammond, Chair of the Humanities Forum, and the Lundberg Institute and the Humanities Forum has been putting on the annual Lundberg Institute Lecture for 15 years. I think when we started, we thought, oh, we'll do this for a couple of years. And so every year, Dr. Lundberg has gotten together one speaker or a panel of speakers on a whole bunch of issues. All of them are on either a podcast or video that you can go back and watch the other ones. We had a lot of them on the pandemic during that time. And so tonight we're going to do one on Cancer Commons. And George, Dr. George Lundberg, that is the editor-in-chief of Cancer Commons. He's the editor-at-large for Medscape. He is a clinical professor of pathology at Northwestern University, and he is also the president and founder of the Lundberg Institute. He's also extremely well-known for his tenure working for the AMA Journal, so as the editor. So George, let us know what we're going to do tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, George Hammond, for your kind introduction, again, for 15 years in a row. Thank you, Commonwealth Club, for hosting this annual Lundberg Institute lecture. Again, 15 years, 3 different venues. This is the best one, obviously, better than the 2 prior ones. Thank you all for in the studio and also online for your attendance and your interest in our subject areas. And again, we're going to be in YouTube with the entire program after there's been a little bit of time for editing. So you can look for that. You can find it if you go to the Commonwealth Club events page, or you can find it by going to the LundbergInstitute.org events page. The Lundberg Institute is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization in Los Gatos, California. Whoops. That's me. As George indicated, I've done a lot of stuff. I'm a physician licensed in the state of California. My first 25-year career was as an academic, clinical, anatomic, forensic, and oncologic pathologist at places like UC Davis, USC, Harvard, Stanford. But then not with enough of stuff. So the last 40 years, my next career has been as a medical editor at a variety of places full-time. The main one was the Journal of the American Medical Association, which I ran for 17 years. Tonight's lecture is Cancer Commons. What on earth is that? 2 million Americans are diagnosed. Whoops, I'm doing the, I control the thing here, but anyway, we jumped ahead one. 2 million Americans, thereabouts, are diagnosed with a potentially lethal cancer every year. Using standard methods, about 1.2 million, or 2/3, are cured. But that leaves about 600,000 who are not, and that's every year. Now we have some ways to get at those as well, but they're just little slices and dices. But that's the 600,000 people who are beyond what we would call the standard of curative care. Those are Cancer Commons patients, whether they know it or not. That is the audience out there that who's going to take care of them? Well, that's where we are. All years are important, some years more than others. In 2010, we founded the Lundberg Institute, and the credo was one patient, one physician, one moment, one decision. Hello? The battery seems not to be working. Let it be a decision shared by the patient and the physician, informed by the best evidence, and taking cost into consideration. This is our board of directors. The bottom 5 plus me have been there the entire 15 years with no change, and we've added Cheryl Green within the last year. 3 of the board are here, Patricia Lundberg back there, and Alan and Cheryl Green are here. They're in the back over here. Thank you for coming. Also in 2010, we began a not-for-profit initiative in a for-profit startup company called Collaborex in Palo Alto. And that initiative in 2010 we called Cancer Commons. It was intended to defeat cancer one patient at a time by openly sharing information in a not-for-profit way. Tonight's program is about Cancer Commons. Our first speaker will be Dr. J.M. Marty Tenenbaum. Marty has a BS and an MS in electrical engineering from MIT, a PhD from Stanford in 1972 when he was working in the early phases of artificial intelligence. AI, 1972 on. Marty, how about that? Time flies, and so does AI. Marty is recognized by many people as an inventor of e-commerce, inventor of it in the early 1990s. And he'll tell you his story, but he now is a fierce advocate for patients with advanced cancer, currently in his role as chairman of the board of directors of Cancer Commons. Emma Stibbleman, one of my favorite people in the world, probably knows more about this subject than anybody there is, and more than most AI systems would ever know, was educated originally in Moscow and got her PhD at the Weizmann Institute in Tel Aviv, came to San Francisco as a postdoc at UCSF, and then did advanced work in cancer cell biology in industry. Emma joined Cancer Commons in 2012 and is our chief scientist. Our third speaker will be remote, and it will be on a pre-recorded video of about 11 minutes. And it is by Dr. Clifford Reed, our new CEO at Cancer Commons, who had a prior engagement that took him away, so he couldn't be here tonight. So he's done the video instead. Cliff's education was a BS in biology from MIT, an MBA from Harvard, and then his PhD for Stanford. Pretty glittery. He's done a lot of stuff. He describes himself as a serial entrepreneur in technology and genomics. Companies that he's founded and run include Complete Genomics and Travera. We will see him by video. Meanwhile, at this time, I hope we can have Marty and Emma on the stage and doing your thing. And after they're both finished, then I'll have additional comments to make about Cliff.
Thank you, George, and thank you to the Commonwealth Club for the opportunity to share our story. I'm a computer scientist, and does this thing need a new battery? Yes. Can we do a timeout?
He'll move it forward while we get through that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Slide, please. I was really fortunate enough to be a computer scientist in the heyday of computers taking over the world in Silicon Valley. George mentioned that I was a pioneer in AI. I actually started, George, at Stanford in 1967. And the robots that I built in the 60s and the 70s have been featured in the Smithsonian and locally in the Computer History Museum. So it's easy to be a pioneer when you're like first in anything. It's a good piece of advice. In the 1990s, I really did play a role in inventing internet commerce as you know it. I started one of the first internet commerce companies, and we did something very crucial, which was to develop the technology that made it possible to do secure transactions on the World Wide Web. At a time when there were like 30 physics labs on the World Wide Web. I don't know what we were thinking, but we liked the technology. And this had a chance it did change the world. And over the next 20 years or so, I started a half a dozen companies largely in the e-commerce space. All of them were successful. But this wonderful life was interrupted in 1998 when I discovered a lump under my arm and I was diagnosed with melanoma metastatic to liver. And this was before any of the checkpoint inhibitors or targeted therapies which were developed in melanoma because it was such a wicked disease. And so given 9 months to live, this happened right in the middle of taking one of these companies public. And so I was looking forward to having all the resources in the world at my disposal, but no time. And I went and talked to all of the local oncologists, as you might imagine, and they all told me the same thing. There's not much we can do. But I went I had an ace in the hole. Rick Klausner, who was in his early 40s, he was running the National Cancer Institute. I was doing some pro bono consulting with him, and he introduced me to a whole new tier of physician scientists that NCI was funding. And can we have the next slide? This is my saint, Don Morton, the man who saved my life. And the physicians who told me there's nothing more that we can do obviously didn't know Don Morton, because this guy is a phenomenal surgeon. And he said, with the calmest of voices, you got a tumor in your liver, we'll take it out. And then I've got this experimental vaccine that I'm running a clinical trial on that will mop up all the residual cells. The lesson of all of this is no one should be able to tell anyone that there's nothing more we can do. There's nothing more they can do, and they didn't know Don Morton. So Don, did these things. And then one morning I woke up in the middle of the clinical trial and saw this headline in the New York Times. Next slide. And just like that, in the paper, the trial I was on was the safety committee read it, the results, the data, and said, it's not working. So I called Don up and I said, is that all there is? And this is, I was lucky enough to have a relationship with this man. Otherwise, who would I call? And he said, yeah, it's over. But as it turns out, it helped a few patients, and I was fortunate enough to be among them. And this was 25 years ago. In fact, a couple of months ago, I celebrated the demise of the last doc who told me that I had 9 months. So, never give up. And when I got my health back, as George said in 2010, the two of us had this idea to try to do for other people what Don and very special doctors like him did for a few patients. We wanted to help everyone. And so we started Cancer Commons to help people who had exhausted all the standard options and needed more help. Next slide. This was an early founding vision of Cancer Commons. And this slide may actually be a verbatim slide from 2012 or thereabouts. From the beginning, we envisioned a system that would help each patient get the best possible outcome and then track what that patient did and how well it worked so we could continuously learn from every patient. And this vision attracted some amazing people. Next slide. There's George Lundberg at the time, up in the corner. He helped me assemble this extraordinary advisory board, mostly his friends. George, as he said, had been the editor of JAMA. Don Kennedy, next to him, was the editor of Science at the time and former president of Stanford. We have on here Frank McCormick, who was running the Helen Diller Center at the University of California, San Francisco, and some deans of medicine, but most importantly, the thought leaders of basically every single cancer. These were all friends of George. And he brought them to the table, and we hit the ground running to help as many patients as we could. Next slide. So our patients would come to us with all kinds of questions, and we'd answer as best we could. Mostly they were looking for sanity checks on their current line of treatment. Were there any additional options that they might consider, especially clinical trials? They'd ask for referrals to top docs and so forth. And we would help them. But what really set Cancer Commons apart was the depth of research that we would do on behalf of these patients and the clarity and compassion with which those results were delivered. Next slide, please. And those are the model of this extraordinary woman sitting here next to me, Angel Emma Stivelman, who, to her patients, and these are all unsolicited words. We have thousands of unsolicited things like that. Emma was previously, in her early career, a bench scientist at UCSF. I think she worked with some of the extraordinary people there, Mike Bishop, Frank McCormick, and so forth, doing some basic science. But at some point, she wanted to do more to help individual patients. And so we connected, and she used the amazing depth of knowledge that she had to help these patients come up with new options. And, equally important, explain them in a way that made her patients call her, equal part genius and angel. Because she was there to help something like 4,000 patients over the last, this one woman, 4,000 patients over the last, dozen or so years. And equally important, what she did was that she recruited and mentored several generations of scientists that she's worked with. Some of them are in the audience tonight. Some of them, they've gone out, like the diaspora, right?
Yeah.
And showed the world how to do what we're doing. Next slide. I'd just like to do a quick shout out to the scientists that are on the team today under Emma's scientific leadership and Adrian's Nugent's operational leadership. And I know all of you guys are out there listening in tonight, so thank you so very much for your service. I've been trying, and I might add unsuccessfully as an AI guy, to try to replicate this team using AI, my go-to talent, to try to replicate what they do. Over the years, they've done probably 12,000 patients as a team. And I am so proud of that, but it's a drop in the bucket. The need is like 12,000 a month in terms of the patients who need help. So how can we scale this in such a way that is financially sustainable and is able to keep this deep compassion? And there's two things that have made that now within the realm of possibility. One is, as you're all aware, AI has had a remarkable set of achievements over the last few years. And so things are possible now that weren't possible in the past. And the next big thing was, the next slide, please. We somehow managed to recruit this extraordinary executive, Cliff Reed, that George told you a bit about, to give up one more startup in his long chain. And this is a man who started 3 companies and took them public and did a bunch more things in between. Complete Genomics, by the way, he took public. He took public. He then sold it to Beijing Genomics. It's now the 2nd largest sequencing company in the world after Illumina. And his most recent company, which he spun out of MIT, Trevera, does functional testing in which you take live tissue and drugs and you test them and predict pretty well how well patients are going to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about functional testing in a bit. So we've got the man with the plan, and he's an extraordinary executive, and he has a plan to take what we've done, our 1,000, 1,500 patients a year, and scale it to 100,000 patients within 18 months. At least aspirationally, that's what we're trying to do. And we've got AI to be able to read the cancer literature and digest it and explain it to patients. And I like to say that we're trying to put Emma in a box. And I actually called the early instance of this system Emma, after this wonderful lady. Cliff is also recruiting an army of nurse navigators He'd like to get 1,000 of them who will, oncology nurses, moonlighting, or retired want to earn some extra bucks, that for people who want the human touch can be there to hold their hand and explain things to them. And he's putting all that together. The second part of Cancer Commons' mission, which I talked about, which we really didn't have the resources to work on at the beginning, was being able to learn from every patient continuously in order to be able to help the next patient. And Cliff and I are going to work on that together. I'm the AI guy. He's the guy with the plan. And if you go to the next slide, I have an aspirational goal. I haven't asked Cliff to buy into this yet, and I don't know whether he will because he's too good a manager to be so aspirational. I only have about 5 more years left to do this stuff, and I have a real desire to make a serious hit on cancer mortality over that time period. And there's a few things that can be done that I think really have the potential to make a major impact over that time period. The first is getting universal access to the best knowledge. The second is taking some of the guesswork out of cancer treatments. And the third is developing some new treatment options. And I'm going to speak just for a minute or two about each of these, and Cliff in his recorded remarks is going to go deeper on them. So next slide, please. It's well known that treatments and outcomes vary widely across institutions, and they tend to decrease rapidly from major academic cancer centers as you move out into community hospitals, and then further afield into rural communities, developing communities, third world communities, and disadvantaged communities. And the question is, why does this happen today in an age where everyone should be able to know what everyone knows? And so there's an opportunity by just bringing everyone up to the level of the best, if we can just figure out who is the best, to save countless lives. And importantly, with no new drugs or no new knowledge. Just find out who's the best and bring everyone up. Now, we are doing, with AI and through our scientists, a lot of deep research to figure out what's the best. And we're going to be compiling guidelines that will be complementary to the National Cancer Center, NCCN guidelines, that are well known for early stage cancers. But they kind of bottom out. They say after first and second line therapy, they consider a clinical trial. That's where we start. That's what our patients need, is systematically to be able to capture that, expert vet it, and then put it out for community comment and continuously track the data. So this gets better and better, and we can update it monthly if necessary. We can update it with every patient. That's the magic of AI. And so there's a real opportunity to make a difference here on a very short time scale. Next slide. That's Sid Mukherjee. He wrote The Emperor of All Maladies. And he is an extraordinary doctor and writer. He made the observation there's a lot of trial and error in cancer. You can have the same drug that works well for some set of patients with a given type of cancer. It doesn't do anything for another set of cancer patients. And for a third set, it just causes some severe adverse reactions. We can do a lot better than that. Turn the page, please. Sad truth is that fewer than 1 in 5 cancer drugs actually works well for the patients for whom it's prescribed, and sometimes it's fewer than 1 in 10. Every patient suffers the side effects of this. So if we can find a way to do something about that, we can make a lot of progress. That's one of the businesses of Trevera. Cliff Apfelt in the front row here, Sage Medic, another startup. There's a bunch of people who are doing some amazing work, and the accuracy, the predictive accuracy of these tests are getting better and better. I think they're approaching like 75 or 80% positive predictive value, namely if the test says it's going to work, it has a good chance of working. If the test says it's not going to work, don't bother wasting your time. So Cancer Commons can be in a position of working with Trevera and Sage Medic and companies like that to figure out which tests are the best for which types of patients and which types of cancer, and build those into the guidelines that we just talked about, so they become widespread. So that's the second of the three things. Third, slide. We need new therapies. Now, it takes over a decade to develop a new cancer drug at a tremendous expense, and that doesn't fit my 5-year time frame. So there is good news, however, which is there's 300 drugs that have already been approved by the FDA for treating cancer, and most of these have been tested in a very small number of patients in a small number of cancers. Right? So the space is greenfield, right? These drugs can and have been used off-label for patients who need them. And even beyond that, the interesting thing is that no one knows the optimal way to use any of these drugs because they have to be used in individualized combination therapies, in cocktails or over time. That's the optimal way. So how can we navigate that space? And the answer is all of those functional tests that we just got through talking about. We can take the guesswork out of it to help each patient get the optimal treatment. And then we can create an N of 1 trial, if you like, which creates the framework for following those patients, seeing what they do, seeing how well it worked, and then building a cohort from the bottom up as opposed to starting a trial with one hypothesis and testing it. This is a way to develop all kinds of new therapies and combination regimens very, very quickly. And I think if we do these three things, we have a real shot at making a meaningful difference in the lifetime of today's cancer patients. Next slide. This is a very ambitious agenda, and no one can do it alone. Certainly not a nonprofit like Cancer Commons. If you're talking about trying to get the infrastructure fixed so that we can figure out how to get people to willingly pool their data and share it, how to be able to build what's necessary so that the functional testing companies can get a tumor specimen out of a community hospital path lab and to their lab properly preserved within 24 hours. And then if we need access to the drugs that we've run tests on, how to get people to agree to give it to us, either through compassionate use from the drug companies or being able to get insurance companies to reimburse, because we will develop the data that will turn these into approved new lines of therapy. So we need, I'm going to be, now that I'm not running Cancer Commons day to day anymore, I'm going to be helping Cliff by starting Cancer Commons Labs and working with all of the organizations that are out there, both for-profit and nonprofit, that we need in order to accomplish our mission and to make it easy for any other organizations that want to work with us, that share our values and so forth, to be able to engage with us. So my final slide is we need to hear from you. If you or anyone that you know and love is dealing with a serious cancer, please reach out to me. My email is there. I'll take the call personally, or go to cancercommons.org and register the patient. It's priceless what we can do, and I don't know any other place where you can get the kind of advice that we provide people. Secondly, if you're if you want personally to engage at a very special time with a very meaningful cancer organization as a volunteer or possibly as a philanthropic supporter, boy, do I want to hear from you. And finally, if you're an organization that shares our vision and values, I want to work with you. Come contact me through Cancer Commons Labs. And so with that, I'm going to turn over the podium to the heart, soul, and brains of Cancer Commons, Emma Stivelman.
Thank you, Marty. Okay. Do I have to do anything? Can everyone hear me? Yes. I am in a quandary now because, of course, I had some prepared words to start with, but now, on one hand, I'm very embarrassed by the accolades that I received from George and Marty. On the other hand, after these accolades, I can say whatever I want and get away with this. But I will not. I want to thank George, who is a real inspiration. Since I met him first time 13 years ago, I will never get enough of him. He's amazing. And I also want to thank him for giving me honor of presenting here. Is it still on? Yeah. I can say that Marty, of course, the founder and driving force behind Cancer Commons, without him, I wouldn't have lasted for 13 years with Cancer Commons trying to do what I do. Having said that, I can move them now. Yes. So first, I will briefly talk about what we do at Cancer Commons. Marty gave a very good explanation. We offer free service to any cancer patients who connects with us. Again, as Marty mentioned, from one scientist operation, we now have 5 PhD scientists with backgrounds in cancer research and 2 professional patient navigators. And again, thanks to Marty. All this thanks to Marty. So what we do, we identify the most relevant clinical trials, and I will talk about it a little more. We also provide informed support for treatment choices, explaining the rationale for our suggestions in lay terms that patients can understand. We refer patients to most relevant diagnostic services, of which there are many now. We provide recommendations for best experts in the particular type of cancer that a patient has in relevant geographical location. We help dealing with side effects of treatments, and we try to do all of that with compassion. Now, why do I emphasize trial? Because trials now are not what they used to be, say, 20 years ago. In old days, it was old chemotherapy drugs that were given in different dosages and different combination maybe. Now, there are so many new drugs to treat cancer. It's, of course, targeted drugs and immune checkpoint drugs that Marty mentioned, cancer vaccines, cell-based treatment, virus-based treatment, and various combinations thereof. Of course, there is still chemotherapy, and there is radiation, but the progress has been amazing in at least 12 years that I've been looking in details at clinical trials. And before, actually, it was mentioned that before I came to Cancer Commons, I was what I call a lab rat. I worked in industry and in UCSF. I ran labs, but I love to spend times in the lab, and I hope it gives me a somewhat different, not different, but maybe deeper look into the mechanisms of how the drugs may or may not work. And I learn every day just by looking at new trials and new drugs. So why the other reason I think the trials are so important? Of course, when I suggest trials to individual patients, I hope that they will enter the trials and it will help them. But also, all drugs are approved based on the results of clinical trials. So each patient that enrolls in a trial benefits other patients like her or him. And of course, drug combinations that could be a lot of time received only in clinical trials, because any drug combination, even with 2 approved drugs, is considered to be a new investigational drug. So drug combinations transform treatment of AIDS, and it happens in cancer. Why patients need help finding clinical trials? Oncologists most often do not send people to clinical trials because they usually don't know or don't have time to know much about trials that are run outside of the clinics. Now, a lot of clinics don't run clinical trials, and these oncologists, many of them general oncologists, have no time to investigate hundreds of clinical trials to find out ones that are suitable for their patients. Patients themselves cannot find relevant trials for many reasons. I've worked with patients who are excellent at doing this, but it's a rarity. It's like, I don't know, 0.2% of all patients that I worked with. Patients just don't have the knowledge about drugs, and the trial website, clinicaltrials.gov, could be a little confusing, to put it mildly. So we usually rank the trials that we suggest based on how promising we consider the drugs offered. Having said all that, it's pretty sad that only 2 to 4% of cancer patients enroll in clinical trials. That's just an example of how I would present a trial to a patient. Usually the list is not one trial, but more. So there is a trial website where they can see information, hopefully understand at least some of it. I provide information about the drug offered. Sometimes, like in this case, there is clinical data on this drug, which are very promising. And of course, I provide the geography of where the trials are run. A lot of time patients don't want to travel even 300 miles and don't want to fly or, God forbid, relocate to different coast. So it's very important to find trials nearby. And now I'll just illustrate what may happen sometimes, not quite as often as I would love to, with a couple of cases of patients who went into trials. This case is about a patient with a very aggressive type of lymphoma, diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, who received several lines of treatment. They couldn't even get her to the point when she was eligible for a bone marrow transplant. Finally, after extensive chemotherapy, she got to that point and they could do bone marrow transplant, and it failed almost immediately. So Cancer Commons encouraged her to go into a trial with CAR-T, which at this time was completely new treatment. There were some results, but it was really in the beginning stages of being, fully explored. It's involved treatment because they isolate immune T cells from the patient, they modify them to recognize cancer cell and reinfuse into the patient. So this patient enrolled, and the treatment was successful. It eliminated all lymphoma, cancer-free for 5 years, and the good thing that treatment called Yescarta was approved for DLBCL 1.5 years after she had a complete response in the trial. If she didn't receive it, she wouldn't be alive to receive it after this time. Second case is about a patient with a prostate cancer who received a lot of lines of treatment during 7 years that he was suffering from it. Nothing worked. His PSA, which is a marker for prostate cancer progression, kept rising. His bone metastases were becoming more and more painful. And throughout these 7 years, he didn't receive mutational testing, which is something that is now almost a routine for, let's say most metastatic cancer patients. So we suggested that he does it, and the testing revealed a feature of his cancer that is very, very rare in prostate cancer. It's called tumor mutational burden, which in his case was very high, rarely seen in prostate cancer. And therefore, he qualified for treatment with an immune checkpoint drug, and his response was amazing, and he's still cancer-free. Third case, if I have time, it's a little similar to the prostate cancer case that I was discussing. Again, no mutational testing was offered to that woman with a very aggressive type of breast cancer. Once it was done, once she was finally able to convince her oncologist to do it, it turned out that she has a mutation that it's not even a mutation, it's called gene amplification that's rarely seen in cancers. And I found one case report in the scientific literature about that alteration that led the doctors on these cases to give these patients immune checkpoint drugs, and they had a good response. That's what she did. She went into a trial nearby and had an excellent response. Now, we not only offer trials, and Marty mentioned it, we try to provide clinically supported evidence on how to enhance activity of drugs. And the suggestions are obviously different depending on what drugs patients receive. Patients who receive immune checkpoint drugs receive a long list of about 8 to 9 suggestions on how to modify their diet, their lifestyle, what time of the day to receive the infusion of immune checkpoint drug. Apparently that's important. And also there are certain supplements that help and certain things that should be avoided. And unfortunately, an important part of what you do is to discourage patients from being lured into fake treatments, of which there are many out there on the social media, etc. This is just an example of how important it would be to try and explain to patients why this treatment is good for them. And it's a citation from one email. If only these nurses and doctors could explain things the way you do. Yeah, we have a little more time than nurses and doctors in oncology, but that's good to know. Good to know that it's appreciated. We also try to explain what to expect as treatment outcomes, because they're very different. Most of patients who turn to Cancer Commons have metastatic cancers, but sometimes they have early stage cancers, and we try to reassure them, if it is indeed so, that they're looking at the cure. I mentioned that this is unfortunately a big part of what we do. We exchanged or developed more or less standard statements that discourage people to go to certain clinics and to pay a lot of money for unproven treatments. It could be very sad. And sometimes people are difficult to convince because they are ready to grab any hope. And I'll finish here with my personal thanks again to Marty and to other wonderful people. I listed here our 2 nurse navigators, Lauren and Ansha, and 4 scientists, Amanda, Adrian, Sunita, and Samantha. But I also want to mention that there are people at Cancer Commons that help it to be. And I did mention them. Masako is here, Shelley. And they're all very dedicated to our mission. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you have the light over here now, for just a moment? Yeah, thank you very much, Marty and Emma. Many of you recall the dot-com boom, followed by the dot-com bust like 25 years ago. Many of you likely worked in the Silicon Valley. I worked then in Silicon Alley, which is what we call this area in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan and downtown. We, including Bill Silberg, who's here tonight, helped at WebMD build Medscape into what it was. A popular book back then that we used to refer to a lot in lectures 25 years ago was called Built to Last, a wonderful book. It's still a good book to read. And in that was an acronym that became famous, BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. Now you're going to see a video which tells you this is our big, hairy, audacious goal. Remember, we're talking about 600,000 Americans every year who fall into this bucket. Thank you very much. Video, please.
Hi, I'm Cliff Reed. I'm the CEO of Cancer Commons, and I'm going to describe for you the future directions of Cancer Commons. The first new direction of Cancer Commons is to dramatically increase the number of patients that we can serve, and here's why. There are approximately 1.8 million new cancer patients every year in the United States, and 1.2 million of them, about 2/3, do quite well. They're detected early, they get surgery, radiation, they're either cured or they're put into a durable remission. But the other 600,000, the other third of the patients don't do well at all. They're either caught late in their cancer or they progress for some reason to become late-stage patients. And eventually those patients hear from their oncologists, under the NCCN guidelines, there's nothing more we can do. Those are Cancer Commons patients. And what we've learned is there's a lot more that we can do with those patients beyond the NCCN guidelines. But with our small team, we're only able to serve about 1,000 patients a year. And we're about to change that. And here's how we're going to do it. We're creating a new information resource called the PCCN guidelines. And the parallel to the NCCN guidelines is intentional, where the NCCN guidelines describes clinical medicine, clinical cancer medicine. The PCCN guidelines, which stands for Post-Clinical Cancer Network, describe all of the options available to cancer patients after they've exhausted the options in the NCCN guidelines. So we say NCCN plus PCCN is complete cancer care. That's the total patient journey. And the PCCN guidelines will offer comprehensive, continuously updated guidance on the cancer care beyond standard of care as the natural complement to the NCCN guidelines. Now, how are we going to do this? Well, PCCN guidelines come in three parts. The first is content, the second is curation, and the third is delivery. On the content side, our subject matter experts, our PhDs, have spent years now browsing through all of the enormous information on the internet available to understand options for post-clinical cancer patients. Well, what we're going to do is now use AI technology to automatically do that for them. That is, we're going to tell an LLM what to look for, because we know how to do that. The LLM will then go out and read millions of pages of internet materials in all different formats, organize it, summarize it, and bring it back into the PCCN guidelines. The kind of information in here will be the emerging clinical trials, off-guideline drugs, although those are largely unavailable. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Advanced diagnostics, integrative medicine, and many other things that can help post-clinical cancer patients. But the problem with this approach is that this material that's generated by the LLMs will be full of errors. It'll be full of hallucinations because LLMs make things up. And it'll be full of bad information because there is information for advanced cancer patients that's intended to deceive. There are a lot of people that try to prey on advanced cancer patients. So we have to get all of that misinformation out of the LLM generated guidelines. And that's where the curation step comes in. We plan to do this in just really the same fashion that the NCCN guidelines does it. We're going to stand up committees of experts to read the output of the LLM, to read the raw PCCN guidelines and edit and correct all the hallucinations, eliminate all the bad information. And the way they edit actually isn't by actually deleting things. It's by just writing new documents that teach the LLM how to correct its mistakes. And we plan to do this on a monthly basis. So we'll re-release the PCCN guidelines every month to keep it fully up to date. And then finally, delivery of the PCCN guidelines to advanced cancer patients. First, we'll publish a website free of charge, and anyone who wants to can just go read it. And it'll look a lot like the NCCN guidelines website, if you're familiar with that. We'll also create a personalized application that will take the patient's medical record in and then view the PCCN guidelines through the lens of that medical record. limited, to their cancer, given their treatments, given their desires and future directions that they want to take. But we've learned at Cancer Commons that an awful lot of cancer patients don't want to read a website, and they probably don't want to talk to their phones either. What they want is a human touch. They want someone to talk to help them through the very difficult process of navigating their options. Now, Cancer Commons will continue to do that, but we just can't scale beyond around 1,000 patients a year. So we've come up with a method for scaling up our services, and that is what we call independent patient navigators. We are going to stand up an army of oncology nurses to provide patient navigation services humanly, one-on-one, with advanced cancer patients. And so we are going to train these independent patient navigators on the PCCN guidelines, and we'll certify them. And then we are going to do a very important thing, which is set up the billing system that enables these oncology nurses to bill Medicare and other insurers for their time. So they don't have to learn how to do that billing. We'll do all that billing for them. So this is the method of providing access to this information to 100,000 cancer patients, not 1,000, but also continuing to provide that human interface that Cancer Commons has provided over this past decade. Now, I mentioned that off-guideline drugs are largely not available to cancer patients, and this is the second new direction of Cancer Commons, because what we're doing is we are going to stand up a clinical study that makes off-guideline drugs available to these patients. And let me describe what I mean by off-guideline drugs. If you go into the NCCN guidelines, there are 39 cancers in the NCCN guidelines, and each of those cancers has a set of drugs that are approved for that cancer. And I just recently went back to the NCCN guidelines and I counted how many drugs are approved for each cancer. And it turns out the cancer with the most approved drugs is breast cancer, and there's 61 approved cancer drugs in breast cancer. The cancer with the fewest number of drugs is pancreatic cancer. There are 15 approved drugs. But if you look at this chart, you can kind of realize, gee, there are 300 FDA-approved drugs, and the number of drugs that actually appear in the NCCN guidelines across all the cancers is about 10%. So 90% of the FDA-approved drugs are just sitting on the shelf, and they're not being used. And is that because we know that those drugs are ineffective for that particular cancer? No, that's not why. Drugs get into the NCCN guidelines through clinical trials. And if a drug has never been run in a clinical trial against a cancer, it's not in the NCCN guidelines. So these 90% of drugs that aren't in the guidelines, it doesn't mean that they don't work for a patient. It just means that no clinical trial has ever been run. So we can change that. What we can do is use new diagnostic tests to make these 90% of drugs available to advanced cancer patients. So these new diagnostic tests, they're called functional tests, test a set of off-guideline drugs against a patient's live cancer cells in the laboratory. And for the drugs that work against that patient's live cancer cells, you write up a report and send it to the oncologist, and the oncologist now has off-guideline drugs that are likely to work in that patient. If this works well, it will change the paradigm of cancer care, because then every advanced cancer patient can run a test against multiple off-guideline drugs, find the 1 or 2 or 3 that work, have their oncologist give them those drugs, which hopefully knocks their cancer down, puts them into remission, very unlikely to do any kind of a cure, but knocking it into remission is what we can get. And if we get, say, a year of remission and then the cancer comes back, we rerun the test. We find a new set of off-guideline drugs that work and apply those to the patient. And if we can just do that, year after year for 20 years and the patient dies of something else, we've succeeded at reducing cancer from a death sentence to a chronic disease. So we are standing up a clinical study to do exactly that. It starts with testing, a genomic test and a functional test, ideally. The test results go to our PhDs, who then go through the scientific literature with those test results in hand and create a scientific report, a scientific basis for applying these FDA-approved drugs. They're safe in humans, but for allowing these FDA-approved drugs to patients who are not in the NCCN guidelines, but we have real evidence that we believe these drugs are going to work for these patients. With that scientific report, we have to get 3 consents. The patient's consent, which is typically quite easy. The patient's oncologist consent, that they're willing to apply to these drugs to these patients. They're safe, but They're not in the NCCN guidelines. And then thirdly, the payer's consent. These are commercially available drugs. They're in the NCCN guidelines for a different cancer, not just for this patient's cancer. And so we need a payer to be willing to pay for those drugs. If we get those three consents, then the oncologist treats the patient with the drug and we get the data. And we have actually organized this clinical study by diagnostic test. And over time, when we have enough data, we'll be able to calculate and report the predictive accuracy of each of the different diagnostic tests that select off-guideline drugs for patients. And if we find one or more tests that do an excellent job of selecting off-guideline drugs for patients, that will change the way advanced cancer patients are treated. Now, we're running this study for our Cancer Commons patients, but we're hoping this study design goes viral. We'd like every patient advocacy to be running this study for their patients, providing their advanced cancer patients with access to that 90% of off-label drugs that they simply have no access to today. And the third thing we're doing at Cancer Commons that's new is that we're gathering all of the data that we generate. So all of our PCCN patients are going to be asked to contribute their data, treatment outcome data, into a PCCN patient registry. And if we can really do 100,000 of these a year, it will be a tremendous data source for understanding which post-standard of care options are most effective. We'll continue to gather the data from our expert guidance system, and there we can learn which pre-standard of care, pre-NCCN guidelines innovations are most effective. And finally, we'll gather the data from our N of 1 clinical study to understand which diagnostic tests are best at identifying effective off-guideline drugs for advanced cancer patients. So all of the data that we're capturing here will provide guidance for patients onto what treatments to follow, but also we hope it'll provide guidance for researchers and investors about promising new approaches in advanced cancer care. So Cancer Commons is offering personalized guidance and enabling personalized treatments beyond standard of care for advanced cancer patients in need, and doing it at scale for the first time. NCCN plus PCCN is complete cancer care. The patient benefit of this approach is high, but unfortunately the profit opportunity is low. So Cancer Commons is supported by grateful patients and by your philanthropy. We're also continuously exploring self-sustaining financial models. Thank you very much.
All right, now we can have maybe 10, 15 minutes of Q&A. Marty and Emma can go on stage. George is available to answer too, and I would appreciate it if you would come up and ask your question here in the light so that you're on the video. If you don't want to do that, well, who wants to ask the first question? We have a lot of doctors in the office, in the room. I'm sure that you have some questions. Cool. All right, well, we'll start with one myself. So, Marty, you have survived so many years from metastatic melanoma, highly unusual. Did you have to take anything else after the original treatment, or has it just stayed without any future treatment?
Excuse me. There was a recurrence 5.5 years out. Mm-hmm. They normally say 5 years, you're done. Don't believe it. Don Morton made his reputation by just knowing so well how these diseases work. Mm-hmm. And he made me get scans every 6 months for quite a few years, and then it was every year. And I wanted to stop, and he said, no, you're not stopping. And so he caught a recurrence early, and we took care of it. And I think it was 2004, something like that. And then I continued to get testing until Don unfortunately passed away from a cancer that he couldn't do surgery on. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't personally take the scan anxiety, not to mention after 40 scans or something like that, I was probably radioactive, mm-hmm. and maybe increased my chance of a follow-on cancer by mm-hmm. 1% or 2%. But it certainly was worth it. So that, the experience is once you've gotten yourself into remission, In my era, it was scans, but nowadays there are very sensitive molecular tests that can detect recurrence. It's very important to keep on that thing and just stay ahead of it.
Yeah, and now the new tests aren't so radioactive.
Yeah, well, they replaced some of the PET CTs with PET MRIs, which are still a lot of radiation. But I always thought that it was possible, and I certainly believe this, that one could, in fact, not routinely do the scans, but to do the scans only when they're indicated that something might be going on because there's some kind of a biological recurrence that you can pick up molecularly.
Amazing, that many years. Emma, so from an emotional point of view, you've dealt with 4,000 patients, Marty said, right? How do you have the strength to do that?
Tough.
Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I cry.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's very sad for more than one reason. Patients die. They have metastatic cancers. And I get very sad when patients refuse to be rational and go and start taking hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin.
Yeah. Has any patient, that you worked really hard for, blamed you?
No,
you've never run into that?
didn't happen. Yeah, I had very few unpleasant encounters. I can cite one, but maybe I shouldn't.
No, that's
The flip
because
side.
I didn't even work with this patient. It was
Yeah.
the second email.
George, the flip side is more common. Emma forms these attachments
Right.
with her patients over many years. And it's very, very hard on her to lose a patient like that.
Yeah. I think in general, everyone sees people, doctors who work in oncology and finds it must be a very difficult field emotionally to do. And of course, it's really valuable for everybody that someone can do it. But go ahead.
Hi, I'm Paul Billings. I'm an internist and medical geneticist. I'm also the vice chairman of the Cancer Commons. I actually have a comment and then a question for Emma. My comment is that we're living in a unique time right now, where there's a lot of hostility about scientific evidence. For instance, all the evidence that we have over decades about vaccines is being called into question.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important as this new program at Cancer Commons becomes not fully evidence-based, but gathers evidence, that it doesn't erode the trust we have in the scientific process and in the quality of science that's occurring in the United States and around the world. This is developing evidence, and it is a part of a good scientific tradition. It's not, shouldn't give rise to more shall we say, non-data-based hallucinations by social network. But the question I have for Emma is, my family has been intimately involved in the development of palliative care in the United States. And I wonder about how you've seen that movement, which has come up, very much over the last couple of decades, and how you see it as either integrated or separated from the kinds of scientific navigation that you provide.
I think palliative care is extremely important. Unfortunately, a lot of patients, when they hear the word palliative, they think it's the end-of-life treatment, which is not true. Palliative care could be also care for side effects or some debilitating consequences of cancer, not necessarily death. So I always suggest to patients to consult patients who are in a lot of pain. That happens frequently because of the cancer itself or because of the treatment. I always suggest to consult palliative care clinics, nurses, doctors, and try to convince them that no, I'm not suggesting it because you're going to die in a month. It's just something to make your life easier. And I hope it will continue to be developed.
Right up.
I'm Magdalena Yashil. Emma, I personally want to thank you because you were there for me and my family when we needed help in the dark hours. My question is, why aren't the payors, who ultimately, I would think, would have savings with individuals who get either cure or some sort of remission, why would they not be more interested? Or life insurance companies, why aren't there other constituencies that are actually the beneficiaries of the work that Cancer Commons does?
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer to this legitimate and very good question. There are a lot of insurance companies are profit-driven, and they can't see beyond whatever the profit goals for that month or year. So they are unwilling to shell out money for the drugs that actually work. And sometimes for even, I've seen cases where insurance companies like Medicaid will not approve a cheap chemotherapy drug. Believe me, I can never accept it. And expensive targeted drugs that cost between $50,000 to $100,000 a year, doctors have to work really hard to convince insurance company to cover their expense. There is no long-term vision. They don't think that that patient will live longer, and frankly, maybe they don't care because they're profit-driven. It's very sad.
There is, in fact, an opportunity for medical insurance payers to make added business, to actually have a profit opportunity by selling a cancer insurance product. Mm-hmm. And you heard Cliff Reed saying that he's continuously looking for ways to finance sustainably the kinds of things that Cancer Commons can do. It could be very productive for Cancer Commons to partner with health and payers in order to be able to provide, if one of their covered people gets sick, mm-hmm. right, the services that we provide, which are good for the patient and good for the profit bottom line. I'd also say, Magdalena, that in passing you just said, why don't health insurance or life insurance? The situation is much clearer and less conflicted for life insurance. They have a very strong desire to keep a patient alive. Mm-hmm. And there's an opportunity for Cancer Commons to partner with life insurance companies as well.
Yeah.
There's another element too. I happen to have worked as a lawyer in that field of insurance, and that is if the law of liability on something new or something that's being done as a test, where there is some protection for the companies, but if it was clear, they would be a little bit more likely to put out the money for it because the liability can be so extreme if it goes wrong. Mm-hmm. That's another profit reason, but it's a painful one.
Yeah, and perhaps I can comment on that as well. So I'm Dr. Chris Upfull, the founder and CEO of SageMedic. So one of those functional precision oncology platforms where we can actually take a patient tissue sample, create microtumor replicates in the lab within just one day, and then we drug them to understand which therapy is most likely to work or not. And it's actually very interesting. We know that from other work as well and our work that it's very easy, or it's very well possible to really predict what cannot work with relatively high accuracy. So if you drug those microtumors in vitro and they still are viable at dosages that a patient can't tolerate, you know this is not going to work. And spending this money on those treatments would not only cause more harm for those patients and possibly shorten the lives, it would also create unnecessary costs. The challenge, I think, what the insurance companies have is, if you can actually find a drug where you can actually increase your survival, let's say a patient that is a stage 2 or stage 3 colorectal or ovarian cancer patient, and by identifying the most effective drug right ahead of time, you actually increase long-term survival by, let's say, 10 or 20% or 30%, that actually saves a ton of money. Mm-hmm. The challenge becomes on those 600,000 patients that are stage 4, where very often it's much harder to find a cure, and you extend life, let's say, for another year, for another 2 years, for another 3 years. But at the end of the day, the total costs for the healthcare is then actually higher, as opposed to the patient dying earlier. And that's the conflict situation where insurance companies are in. That's the reason why there is the saying of the 3 Ds: delay, deny, death. So if the patient cannot be cured, finding something that gives this patient another 1, 2, 3 more years of life usually increase healthcare costs, and that is, for insurance companies, understandably a challenge.
Right. And now, I'm sorry, we've run out of questions. I mean, we've run out of time. We haven't run out of questions, unfortunately. But for 15 years, I wanted to ask George this question, so I thought we would end with this one. So George, you were a practicing physician for 15, 25 years, and then you switched to being an editor. Are you happy that you made that switch? And what was the difficulty to go from a practicing physician to an academic reviewer of other people's work?
I like to solve problems, and I like to look at complicated, difficult problems, and then I like to be able to say this is a solution and let people learn from that. And I think going from being a practicing pathologist, in which pathologists these days are largely managers of large numbers of people in large laboratories, editors of large journals are managers of large numbers of writers and editors, and they're all trying to do the same thing. So it really isn't all that different as long as you retain a solid scientific base. Clinical empathy and understanding are really serious about ethics and doing ethics right no matter where you are. That transition is not that hard. It's rather easy, especially if you keep one foot back where you were and don't lose track of that. So not a problem, no big deal.
Well, we're very glad that you did. You've made a great contribution for so many years in the field. And I just wanted to end with one small comment about the worry about the lack of interest in science that's currently afflicting our society. There's, of course, all kinds of people whose experience tells them that they can't trust science. That's not very many people. But I think that what we're going through right now is going to reinforce the idea, because of the outcomes that are going to result, unfortunately. That's going to reinforce science as the way to move forward to improve the quality of our lives. I think that's bound to happen within 5 years. And for those of you who think that that's impossible when something bad is happening, just remember, if you were in Berlin in 1944, you probably would not have imagined, as everything was crashing around you, that by 1960 it would be a middle-class city again. It's just, that's the way we are as humans. We're way too educated to put up with this for very long. Even if some group is very excited about it, it's already splintering. You know what happened to the communists, Stalin, Trotsky, pretty soon everybody's all arguing with each other, and the next thing is they fall apart. It's a very painful transition, but I think it's undoubtedly going to go science's way, no question about it. So anyway, thank you very much, George, for the 15th Annual Lundberg Institute Lecture. Marty, Emma, thank you so much for coming here and sharing this with us. Thank you. And so ends another event at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. in its 23rd year of enlightened discussion. Thank you very much. See you again next year, George.